Hey guys, tonight we are going to unveil a deeply hidden historical secret together. He was the first Protestant King of England, but his death was utterly tragic, followed by a fiercely contested funeral and a resting place that was constantly disturbed over many centuries. The tomb of this last Tudor monarch was desecrated by the Puritans, and later dug up by the curious Victorians themselves. Today, we are going to dive deep into the afterlife of Edward VI, a story more gruesome than you might imagine. We will explore in detail what was discovered inside his tomb in the 1860s, and more importantly, what the condition of the young king's remains revealed about the manner of his death. I will bring you an authentic, first-hand account of this disinterment, complete with images of the artifacts retrieved. Furthermore, we will decipher why Edward VI never received a monument befitting his status, and why his tomb is hidden, not lying beneath the official marker bearing his name. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you are watching from and what the local time is. We always welcome friends from all over the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Edward VI was the only surviving son of King Henry VIII and his third wife, Jane Seymour. He was born in October 1537 at Hampton Court Palace, a fragile infant whose arrival was swiftly followed by tragedy. His mother succumbed to post-natal complications just 12 days later. Thrust into a world already marked by grief, young Edward spent his earliest years under the watchful eye of court physicians and noble guardians, learning the rituals of royalty even as he remained but a child. By the time he celebrated his 9th birthday, Edward had suffered another profound loss: his father's death in January 1547. At that moment, Edward ascended the throne as King of England, becoming the youngest monarch in the history of the Tudor dynasty to rule in his own right. Surrounded by regents and advisors who wielded the real power, he presided over a kingdom divided by religious upheaval, as the Church of England sought to define itself apart from Rome. Edward's reign lasted nearly 6 years. In the early summer of 1553, when he was in the 15th year of his life, the first telltale signs of illness appeared. A persistent cough gave way to distressing expectorations, green, yellow, black, and at times tinged with blood. Historians now believe these symptoms align with pulmonary tuberculosis, a disease that claimed countless lives in Tudor England. Yet whispers at court suggested something more sinister: poison administered by political rivals. On the 30th day of May 1553, the imperial ambassador to England, Jehan Shive, wrote home with a grim report. The King of England is wasting away daily, and there is no sign or likelihood of any improvement. His body has begun to swell, especially about the head and feet. His hair must be shaved off, and plasters are being applied to his head. Shive's letter compared Edward's suffering to that of Henry Fitzroy, Duke of Richmond, Edward's elder half-brother, who had died of similar symptoms at the age of 17 in the year 1536. Over the next fortnight, Edward's condition deteriorated further. By the 11th of June, Shive observed that the young king could no longer keep any nourishment down, living solely on restorative broths and forced to lie flat on his back, exhausted and swollen. It is hardly to be believed, the ambassador noted, how much the king has changed since the 11th. As June yielded to July, Edward himself made a fleeting appearance at a palace window so thin and wasted that onlookers said he looked already as if he were doomed. On the 6th day of July in the year 1553, at the 8th hour of the evening, Edward VI drew his final breath. He was but 15 years old. A post-mortem examination was performed, and though no contemporary source confirms the full details of embalming, it is likely that his body was wrapped in cerecloth, a linen soaked in aromatic resins, then placed in a lead coffin, which itself was encased in an outer wooden coffin. These precautions were meant to preserve the royal remains, yet they did little to shield them from the turbulent currents of politics and faith that swirled around his passing. Almost immediately, Edward's funeral rites were postponed. The Duke of Northumberland, father-in-law to Lady Jane Grey, had engineered a brief coup to place his daughter on the throne, instead of Edward's half-sister, Mary I. In the days following the king's death, Queen Mary faced the delicate task of quelling this rebellion while honouring her brother's memory. Equally vexing was the question of ritual. Edward had been a staunch Protestant, crowned under the reforms of his father, whereas Mary remained a devout Catholic intent on restoring papal traditions. Thus, the boy king's final journey to his resting place was suspended, caught between the passions of reformers and the devotions of Catholics. His coffin remained in repose at Greenwich Palace, awaiting the resolution of Lady Jane Grey's ill-fated claim and the larger contest over England's religious future. In the hush that followed his death, Edward's legacy hung in the balance. A young ruler claimed by both disease and dissent, whose brief life both reflected and shaped an era of profound change. The interment of Edward VI proved to be anything but straightforward. In the wake of his death on the 6th day of July, in the year 1553, his eldest sister, Mary I, faced the urgent task of quelling the rebellion that had briefly elevated Lady Jane Grey to the throne. Only after Lady Jane's supporters were suppressed could Mary turn her attention to her brother's funeral, and even then she confronted a dilemma that cut to the heart of her reign. Should Edward be buried according to the rites of the Reformed Church of England, which he had championed, or in the solemn traditions of the Roman Catholic faith, which she now sought to restore? On the 24th day of July in 1553, Spanish ambassadors, cousins of the new Queen and intimate agents of the Emperor Charles V, conveyed a delicate missive back to Madrid. They reported that Mary was weighing the prayers and ceremonies observed by those who adhere to the old religion, meaning the Roman Rite. Yet they counselled caution, warning that if she inaugurated her reign with an ostentatious Catholic funeral, she would appear partial to Protestant England's recent reforms. Such a perception, the ambassadors feared, would render her odious and suspect in the eyes of her subjects. 9 days later, on the 2nd day of August in 1553, the same envoys pressed the matter further. They cautioned that to bury Edward wholly according to Catholic ritual would too sorely violate her conscience, for she was bound by the will of her late father, Henry VIII, which mandated masses and prayers for his soul. Yet they warned, if she appeared to be afraid, her subjects, particularly the Lutherans, would only grow more audacious, proclaiming that she did not dare to act upon her own will. Thus, Mary I found herself in a bind. On one hand, her Catholic convictions and her father's testament both urged a full Roman funeral. On the other, political prudence demanded deference to the Protestant establishment that had prevailed during Edward's minority. The ambassadors suggested a compromise. Mary might summon her council to permit a Catholic mass at the funeral, but make attendance entirely voluntary, so that no man be compelled against his conscience. They even proposed an auxiliary service within the Tower of London, where she could fulfill her duty privately without alienating the broader populace. In the days that followed, Mary laboured to persuade her Privy Council that such accommodations would preserve both her authority and her conscience. She argued that England had not changed its religion by mere whim, but through the influence of the Protector and Parliament. If she forced mass upon unwilling subjects at the very moment they gathered to mourn their late king, she risked igniting unrest among those still loyal to Edward's reforms. Yet she was also determined to honour her father's wishes and her own faith. Ultimately, Mary I resolved upon a twofold approach. The principal funeral procession and requiem would be conducted at Westminster Abbey under the rites of the Church of England. This would placate the Protestant majority and acknowledge Edward's own confession of faith. Thereafter, discreet Catholic masses for the king's soul would be offered within the private chapel of the Tower of London, where attendance would be strictly optional. By decoupling the Catholic ceremony from the public funeral, Mary preserved her image as a sovereign who respected her brother's legacy, even as she sought to reintroduce the old religion at her own pace. Thus, on the 8th day of August in the year 1553, Edward VI was finally laid to rest. A Protestant service in English, overseen by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer and employing the Book of Common Prayer, marked the public farewell. Yet in the quiet hush of the Tower Chapel, Catholic clergy offered the Latin masses his father had ordained. By this delicate compromise, Mary I navigated the treacherous currents of faith and power, honouring both her brother's memory and her own convictions without tipping England back into religious turmoil. In the stillness of that summer, as candles flickered in both abbey and tower, the boy king's remains found rest. Yet the complex negotiations that preceded his burial would echo through the Tudor era, a testament to the wrenching choices faced by those who rule at the crossroads of belief and authority. On the 8th of August 1553, at the gentle break of dawn, the funeral cortege of Edward VI departed from Whitehall Palace. An air of solemn sorrow enveloped the West End of London as the subtle murmur of tearful lamentations drifted through the cool summer mist. The streets, ordinarily bustling with merchants and townsfolk, lay hushed under the weight of collective grief, broken only by the muffled tread of the mourners' feet and the distant toll of church bells. Henry Mackin, a London merchant and diarist, recorded the procession in meticulous detail. First in the line came a company of children clad in white surplices, their faces softly illuminated by the early light as they sang plain-song hymns. These youthful choristers, sombre beyond their years, led the cortege with voices trembling like leaves in a gentle wind. Behind them followed the king's bedchamber attendants, the men who had tended Edward's sickbed in his final days, dressed in sober black doublets, their expressions grave and reverent. Next rode two heralds, their tabards emblazoned with the royal arms, announcing in measured tones the presence of the late king's body. They bore long trumpets, now silent, their tarnished brass glinting faintly. After the heralds came a standard depicting a dragon passant, symbol of strength and vigilance, juxtaposed with a second banner bearing the white greyhound, emblem of the Seymour family, under whose protection Edward had been born. A considerable retinue of court officials followed, all clad in mourning black, their garments edged with black tippets and gloves of deepest sable. Each man moved with measured dignity, forming an unbroken tapestry of sombre uniformity. Further still came more heralds, and then a high banner of the royal coat of arms, richly embroidered in gold thread upon purple velvet, the intricate design showcasing the lion and the unicorn in fierce alliance. Shortly after, Sir Thomas Clarenshaw, master of the King's Horse, rode forth, bearing the royal sceptre and the garter insignia upon a velvet cushion, symbols of Edward's supreme authority and knighthood in the Order of the Garter. He wore a long cloak of sable damask, his horse draped in matching black velvet that swept the ground. Following him, riders in full-plate armour carried small banners bearing the heraldic devices of the royal household, their polished helms and breastplates reflecting the sombre procession. Then came the hearse itself, an ornate carriage carved from dark oak and draped in black velvet, the cloth embroidered with mourning emblems in silver thread. Upon this crowning vehicle lay the lead coffin, its stark metallic surface shrouded beneath a rich pall of cloth of gold. Atop the coffin rested a wax effigy of the late king, his likeness rendered in lifelike detail, crown upon his head, sceptre in his right hand, the garter fastened below his left knee, its painted features serene and still, as if he were merely sleeping. Flanking the hearse were 4 knights of the body, each mounted upon a coal-black steed caparisoned in heavy velvet bearing embroidered banners. These knights upheld the honour of the late sovereign, their helmets cresting high above their shoulders, visors down to veil their faces in silent mourning. Behind them marched 4 banners, each representing a critical dimension of the king's lineage and legacy. The banner of the Order of the Garter, honouring Edward's status as sovereign of that chivalric brotherhood. The banner of the Red Rose of Lancaster, signifying his Tudor heritage. The banner of Jane Seymour, his beloved mother. And, most surprisingly, a banner of Catherine of Aragon, his father's first queen. Some whispered that Mary I had ordered Catherine's banner, included as a subtle rebuke to Edward, recalling his declaration that Henry's first marriage was null and void, an early crack in the fabric of familial loyalty. Throughout the ceremony, the language of devotion was English, in accordance with the Book of Common Prayer. The service was led by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer of Canterbury, the architect of the English liturgy who had crowned Edward at his accession. Cranmer's voice rang softly through the abbey precincts as he intoned the familiar words of committal, his cadences measured and consoling, guiding the mourners through the ancient rites with gentle authority. Queen Mary I did not attend the public procession or the abbey service, mindful that her presence might imply favouritism toward the Protestant cause. Instead, she remained within the Tower of London, where she quietly arranged for Catholic masses to be said for her brother's soul, fulfilling her filial duty to her late father's will. In the cool gloom of the Tower Chapel, priests vested in crimson and gold intoned the Latin Requiem, candles flickering upon the altar as prayers ascended for the young king's repose. Thus concluded the public mourning for Edward VI. The cortege, winding its way through the silent streets, left behind a city united in sorrow yet divided in faith. In the hush that followed, The echoes of ancient rites and modern innovations lingered in the air, a haunting farewell to the boy king whose brief life and troubled passing had shaped the destiny of England's church and crown. Edward was laid to rest in a modest vault beneath the chapel of Henry VII at Westminster Abbey. The lead coffin settled into a shallow tomb barely 2.5 feet in width and 7.5 feet in length. Remarkably, the depth was only a matter of a few inches beneath the chapel's stone floor, so limited was the space that no other coffin could ever be accommodated alongside his. In this confined chamber, there was no grand monument or marble sarcophagus to mark the grave of England's first Protestant monarch. Indeed, around 1573, a design by Cornelius Cure proposed an elaborate memorial, yet it never came to fruition. Queen Elizabeth I and her descendants showed little enthusiasm for erecting a personal cenotaph for her brother, and the chapel's narrow dimensions offered no room for such an addition. Instead, Edward's final resting place was concealed beneath a brass altar. This altar was the work of Pietro Torrigiano, the Italian sculptor who had departed this life in 1528. Originally, his richly ornamented altar had stood elsewhere in the chapel, its base forming a grand dais for the celebration of Mass. When Edward's coffin was interred, wardens of the abbey carefully raised Torrigiano's altar from its original position and set his lead coffin directly beneath the ornate brass plate. With the coffin in place, they then lowered the altar back into position overhead, its gleaming surface masking the royal vault below. Thus, visitors stepping into the chapel of Henry VII would see only Torrigiano's artistry above them, swirling scrolls, heraldic shields, and carved foliage rendered in warm bronze. The actual site of Edward's grave remained hidden, known only to the abbey's custodians and select clergy. Candles flickering on the altar's edge cast soft shadows across the surrounding stone, lending an otherworldly hush to the tomb beneath. This arrangement suited the sensibilities of the early Elizabethan age. A visible monument to Edward's Protestant faith might have risked sparking political or religious tension in a kingdom still healing from the reforms of his father and the persecutions under his sister Mary. By placing him beneath an existing Catholic altar, albeit one crafted by an artist who died decades before Edward was born, the abbey maintained a discreet unity of Tudor memory. Though no separate memorial ever pierced the floor in his name, the presence of that brass altar carried its own solemn weight. It alluded to both continuity and change. Continuity in the form of an altar used for centuries of worship, and change in the fact that beneath its base rested a monarch who had embraced a new religious settlement. In the stillness of the chapel, one could imagine the hush that fell on the mourners of August. The 8th. 1553 voices softened, steps measured, tears restrained, never suspecting that beneath their feet lay a young king's remains, encased in lead, sheltered by brass, and hidden from sight by centuries of devotion and discretion. In that hidden vault, Edward VI rests on, his legacy whispered only to those who know to look beyond the altar's gleam. During the English Commonwealth period in the 1640s, the Puritan authorities undertook a systematic purge of what they considered idolatrous ornaments within Westminster Abbey. Among their targets was the elaborately wrought brass altar crafted by Pietro Torrigiano, the Italian sculptor who had died in 1528. Seeking to remove the weapons of popery, they dismantled the altar above Edward VI's resting place, prying away panels and decorative elements with resolute zeal. Fragments of marble bas-relief, once carved with Tudor roses and the lilies of France, were cast aside and tumbling into the shallow vault below. Over the centuries, these discarded fragments lay hidden beneath the chapel floor alongside the leaden coffin. Only the ragged remnants of Kentish rag stone steps, likely the altar's original dais, continued to mark the spot, their octagonal ends and polished borders peeking out from the rubble. The Puritan zeal left a jumbled cairn of stone and metal, as though the young king's tomb had become a makeshift storeroom for broken art. It was not until the reign of Queen Victoria on the 17th day of February, in the year 1869, that the tomb of Edward VI was formally reopened. The impetus was not for Edward's commemoration, but rather to verify the location of King James I's remains in the adjacent vault. During the search, Dean Arthur Penrhyn Stanley supervised the excavation of Edward's burial chamber, and his account, published in 1869, remains our primary source for that haunting event. Stanley described the lead coffin as rent and deformed, wasted by long corrosion, its metal sides crushed inward as if by the weight of centuries. The wooden case encasing it had rotted away in many places, leaving only splintered fragments of oak. Resting atop the coffin were slabs of Kentish ragstone 2 or 3 steps from the original altar dais, each roughly 3 by 0.5 by 0.17 meters in size. These stone blocks, now dull and frosted, bore witness to the Puritans' earlier dismantling. Alongside the ragstone lay a single fragment of marble bas-relief, measuring 3 by 0.5 by 0.1. 7 meters of detail Stanley noted with fascination. The carving, he wrote, displayed heraldic badges, Tudor roses, and French lilies set amid scrolling foliage, executed in the purest style of the early Renaissance. 2 iron cramps, still rusted in place, indicated where the marble had once been bound to the altar's frame. A third, now broken, suggested an earlier fracture that had been crudely mended. Beneath these relics, Stanley discovered the coffin's back panel, a leaden plate so corroded that its inscription was illegible by faint light. With patient effort under brighter illumination, he deciphered every capital letter of the epitaph, revealing for the first time its full Protestant declaration. Edward VI, by the grace of God, King of England, France and Ireland, defender of the faith, and on earth under Christ supreme head of the churches of England and Ireland, he migrated from this life on the 6th day of July, in the year of our Lord 1553, in the 7th year of his reign, and in the 16th year of his age. This remarkable inscription confirmed that the wording had been engraved during the brief interlude after Edward's death and before his burial, an interval of 9 days, during which Lady Jane Grey still held hope for her own rule. Stanley then turned to the rear of the coffin, where the seri-cloth binding had fallen away. There, he found the young king's skull, bare of any hair. This grim revelation lent credence to contemporary reports that Edward's hair had been shaved off either as a medical measure during his last illness, or, perhaps, stripped away by later tomb raiders in search of relics. After the examination, Dean Stanley saw to it that the fragments were respectfully restored. A new marble slab was laid in the chapel floor, bearing a modern copy of the coffin's inscription as well as the date of the 1869 opening. In 1535, a replacement altar was installed above the vault, its design allowing one panel of Torrigiano's original bas-relief to be displayed on the front face. This fragment now serves as a poignant reminder of both the altar's beauty and the violent circumstances of its removal. Thus, the tomb of Edward VI remained hidden beneath a modern altar, its lead coffin and original inscription preserved beneath layers of stone and metal. The discovery in 1869 did more than satisfy Victorian curiosity. It illuminated the tomb's turbulent history, from its initial concealment under a Renaissance altar to its desecration by Puritan iconoclasts. In the quiet chapel of Henry VII, those fragments of marble and the battered coffin speak still of a boy king's fragile life, his contested burial, and the enduring interplay of faith, politics, and art that marked the Tudor age. Early in the year 1869, under the reign of Queen Victoria, Westminster Abbey embarked on a solemn task to locate the remains of King James I within the chapel of Henry VII. James lay interred in a vault adjacent to that of his predecessor, Edward VI, whose modest resting place was little more than a shallow hollow beneath the tiled floor. On a mist-laden morning in February, Dean Arthur Penrhyn Stanley oversaw the careful removal of the stone paving above Edward's tomb. With each heave of crowbar and chisel, centuries of dust and quiet settled onto the chamber floor below. At last, when the final slab was lifted, there emerged a cavity scarcely the size of the lead coffin itself. Stanley described the grim spectacle in his diary. The coffin's tarnished lid lay exposed, its edges crushed inward and deeply corroded, most likely the result of repeated disturbances over nearly 3 centuries. The wooden case that once enclosed the lead shell had rotted away in many places, leaving only splintered fragments of oak. Yet despite the decay, a few substantial fragments remained intact. Resting directly atop the coffin were several slabs of Kentish ragstone, part of what had originally formed the steps of Pietro Torrigiano's brass altar. Each ragstone block measured some 3 feet in length, with chamfered octagonal ends and a polished border encircling a frosted, light grey surface. These blocks bore silent witness to the Puritan iconoclasm of December the 22nd, 1641, when militant reformers had demanded the removal of popish furnishings. In their zeal to eradicate any traces of Roman rites, They had dismantled Torrigiano's once grand altar and flung its components into the shallow vault below. Among the ragstone lay a single exquisite fragment of white marble relief, measuring 3 feet 8 inches long, 7 inches high, and 6 inches thick, its face carved with alternating heraldic emblems and floral scrolls. The intricate bas-relief depicted Tudor roses and French lilies interlaced with curling vines, the work of an artisan steeped in the early Renaissance style. 2 iron cramps still protruded from its back edge, their rusted forms testifying to an earlier fracture and the crude attempt to bind the piece back together. Near these, deep stains of iron oxide marked where a supporting bar once pressed against the carved surface in an effort to reinforce the marble. The discovery of this marble frieze was more than a mere archaeological curiosity. It confirmed that the original brass altar had indeed stood directly above Edward's coffin, only to be torn down by the Puritan faction. The elegantly carved slab, now lying among broken oak and corroded lead, evoked a poignant tableau, the debris of a resplendent altar scattered upon the vessel of a young king. In that silent chamber, the man who had reigned briefly as England's first Protestant monarch lay encased beneath the ruins of his own memorial. Stanley paused before the fragments, penitent and sombre, reflecting on how a funeral meant to honour reform had become an inadvertent refuge for shattered artistry. The vaulted roof above, centuries old, bore no mark of the Puritan purge, yet its dusty curves had sheltered the tumble of ragstone and marble, as faithfully as the leaden roof had shielded Edward's remains. For the Dean, the scene drew out the complex layers of appropriation that defined royal tombs. First interred with a measure of dignity beneath Torrigiano's altar, then exposed by reformers' fervour, then laid bare by Victorian curiosity. Carefully, the ecclesiastical team gathered the ragstone into bundles and lifted the marble fragment onto a padded cart. Each piece was catalogued and conveyed to the abbey's chapter house for conservation. There, skilled masons and antiquarians would rescue what they could of Torrigiano's work, stabilizing the cracks and removing centuries of grime. Their aim was not to restore the altar to its former ecclesiastical function — Puritan zeal had forever altered its context — but to preserve a fragment of Tudor heritage and to represent it to future generations as tangible evidence of the abbey's layered history. As the final stone slab was reset over the vault, sealing the chamber once more, Dean Stanley consecrated the rediscovered remains with a brief prayer. The shallow tomb, now refilled, would sleep on beneath a new marble slab, one inscribed with the date of the 1869 opening and a modern translation of Edward's own coffin epitaph. Above this slab, a 20th century altar, erected in 1935, would replace Torrigiano's vanished masterpiece, yet retain, inset upon its front face, the rescued fragment of bas-relief. And so, beneath the vaulted arches of the chapel of Henry VII, the echoes of Puritan hammers, Victorian spades, and Renaissance chisels all converged. In the hush that followed the resealing of the tomb, the fragments of marble and ragstone lay at rest once more, bearing silent witness to a boy king's turbulent passage from life to death, and from tomb to memory. Under the layers of Kentish ragstone and Renaissance marble, the excavators uncovered the coffin plate, the thin sheet of lead securely fastened to the top of the king's coffin. When first exposed, the plate's surface was so ravaged by centuries of oxidation that no inscription could be discerned in the dim glow of lantern light. Yet when brought into the abbey's chapter house and illuminated by bright gas lamps, the painstaking efforts of antiquarians and conservators revealed letter by letter the intact capitals, each raised and spaced with precise regularity. The most remarkable portion of the inscription was the full royal style adopted by Edward VI during the brief interlude after his death and before his interment. It read, in Latin capitals, exactly as it had been engraved in the summer of 1553, Ilvados vid gratia Rex Angli Franci et Hiberni, fidei defensor et inter sub Christus somus caput ecclesiarum Angli et Hiberni. In his 1869 supplement to the Abbey records, Dean Arthur Penrhyn Stanley provided an English rendering, preserving both the majesty and the theological assertion of the original. Edward VI, by the grace of God, King of England, France and Ireland, defender of the faith, and on earth under Christ supreme head of the churches of England and Ireland. This declaration was more than ceremonial flourish. It encapsulated the exact moment in which the English Reformation had been codified in royal authority. The title Defender of the Faith had been conferred upon Henry VIII by Pope Leo X in the year 1514, yet following the break with Rome, the meaning of that title had been transformed. By carving, and on earth, under Christ, supreme head of the churches of England and Ireland, the inscription affirmed that Edward had inherited both spiritual and temporal leadership of the newly established national church, a claim that existed between his father's enactment of the Act of Supremacy in 1534 and his own untimely death on the 6th day of July in the year 1553. Beneath the royal style followed a precise chronicle of the king's passing. The 6th day of July in the year of our Lord 1553, at the 8th hour of the evening, in the 7th year of his reign, and in the 16th year of his age. To translate those figures into narrative, the date, 7th of the month of July, marks the king's death as documented in multiple contemporary accounts. The 8th hour refers to approximately 2 o'clock in the evening by the convention of monastic timekeeping. His 7th year of reign confirms that Edward had reigned since January of 1547, a period of just over 6 years. And, in the 16th year of his age, reiterates that he had not reached his 17th birthday, underscoring his youth and the tragedy of his early demise. The presence of such an unaltered inscription is extraordinary. Had Mary I delayed her brother's interment or ordered a Catholic epitaph, this Protestant proclamation might have been effaced, altered, or entirely removed. Instead, the leaden plate, snug within its coffin, was spared the hands of iconoclasts and the whims of those who sought to erase the Reformation's earliest triumphs. After recording the full transcription and translation, conservators set about preserving the plate for posterity. To arrest further corrosion, they applied a solution of shellac, a resinous coating that seals out moisture and air. Once stabilized, the plate was lifted from the coffin and mounted upon a new slab of white marble, which now lies flush with the stone floor in the chapel of Henry VII. An engraved frame around the plate bears the date of the opening, February the 17th, 1869, and notes the plate's creation in the summer of 1553. Today, visitors to Westminster Abbey can peer down through a glass panel set into the chapel floor to read Edward's own words, rendered in a smooth, modern typeface. The display preserves the exact letter forms of the original capitals, inviting reflection on the fragile continuity between Tudor fervour and Victorian scholarship. In hushed tones, pilgrims and tourists alike contemplate how a single lead plate, buried beneath layers of centuries-old stone, could survive iconoclasm, neglect, and time itself to speak across 400 years. Thus, the coffin plate of Edward VI remains both an artifact and an inscription, a testament to a moment when monarchy and ministry converged, when a teenage king bore the dual mantle of earthly sovereign and spiritual head, however briefly. Beneath the glitter of brass and the hush of candlelight, the sleeping monarch continues to affirm, in raised lead characters, the revolutionary title he wore in life, supreme head of the churches of England and Ireland. When the final wooden boards were carefully lifted away, the leaden coffin's base was laid bare for the first time in more than 3 centuries. Dean Arthur Penrhyn Stanley, bending low to inspect, found the spot directly beneath the marble floor of the chapel of Henry VII revealed a single, solid lead coffin. With solemn care, the team removed the last interior plank of oak, and there, under the wavering glow of lanterns, they beheld the skull of Edward VI. The cericloth wrappings, fine linen soaked in balsamic resins and spices, had unravelled over time. Only a few brittle fragments of that fragrant cloth remained, clinging to the edges of the skull like dying cobwebs. What caught everyone's breath was the complete absence of hair upon the cranial vault. No brittle locks, no shards of amber tresses, nothing to suggest that Edward's dark curls had endured the earth's quiet embrace. Stanley and those present pondered the most likely explanation, that the boy king's hair had been shaved off in the final weeks of his life. Contemporary accounts, including the Imperial Ambassador Jehan Shive's letter of the 30th of May in the year 1553, described how the king's hair must be shaved off to allow medicated plasters to be applied to his swollen head, thereby easing his restless nights. After Edward's death on the 6th day of July in 1553, any remaining hair could have fallen away entirely, but the abrupt bareness suggested that the ritual shaving took place before he was laid in his coffin. Yet the opening of Edward's tomb in 1869 also raised darker possibilities. While the cerecloth had slipped from the skull, it remained largely intact around the torso, as if deliberately cut away only at the head. Stanley conjectured that during the English Commonwealth in the 1640s, when Puritan iconoclasts roamed the abbey, someone might have pried open the vault again. It was not unheard of for zealous or curious individuals to expose royal remains, seeking relics for devotion or trophies of rebellion. Catherine Parr, the last wife of Henry VIII, and even King Charles I saw their tombs violated in later centuries. Some visitors snipped a lock of hair, etched their initials on bone, or pocketed a tooth as a token. In Edward's case, the absence of hair on the skull hints at a macabre fascination. Collectors might have believed that the head of the first Protestant king bore singular power or curiosity. Perhaps some Cromwellite took a sheaf of hair as proof of victory over popish princes, or an unsuspecting pilgrim simply sought an heirloom. Yet no such personal souvenirs surfaced in the archival, records only the skull's naked crown, stark against the lead. Despite the skull's exposure and the torn cerecloth, the remains lay undisturbed for another century until the Victorian restoration. Conservation specialists later examined the bones and wrappings, charting the state of preservation. They found no evidence of rodent gnawing or water damage from damp floors. The lead shell had sealed the body within an anaerobic cocoon, slowing decay and shielding the corpse from insects. Even the cerement, the waxed linen though brittle, had largely preserved the king's bones from contact with soil. Once the experts completed their study, they rewrapped the skeletal remains in fresh, sterile linen and resealed the lead coffin. Workers replaced the oak planks and gently compacted the offcuts of Kentish ragstone and marble fragments back into the cavity. Above it, the original stone paving was relaid, each tile reset to its proper alignment. The abbey's masons reinforced the brick vault beneath the altar's dais, using small enough mortar repairs to stabilize the structure without altering its appearance. In 1935, a new altar was installed above Edward's vault, designed to respect the solemnity of the tomb rather than to embellish it. The porch-like panel on the altar's front displays the rescued marble bas-relief from Pietro Torrigiano's original work, now framed by muted sandstone. No gilded carvings or bright paintings compete for attention. Instead, candles flicker softly, the cool stone walls absorb the hush, and visitors stand reverently at a respectful distance. Thus, the abbey preserved the burial chamber of Edward VI in a spirit of restrained dignity, the fragile skull without its hair, the brittle cerecloth fragments. The lead coffin each remains a testament to the boy king's brief life and the centuries of religious and political upheaval that shaped his posthumous fate. Beneath the altar's quiet shadow, Edward sleeps on, his tomb sealed once more, guarded by stone and memory. After the 1869 excavation, the chapter of Westminster Abbey resolved to mark more clearly the resting place of the boy king. In the spring of 1870, masons installed a fossil marble slab directly above Edward's vault. This slab, quarried from the same Dorset cliffs that supplied Stonehenge's bluestones, bore an exact replica of the original coffin plate inscription in raised relief. Edward VI, by the grace of God, King of England, France and Ireland, defender of the faith, and on earth, under Christ's supreme head of the churches of England and Ireland. He migrated from this life on the 6th day of July, in the year of our Lord 1553, in the 7th year of his reign, and in the 16th year of his age. The letters, each a few inches tall, glowed faintly under the chapel's subdued lighting, reminding visitors of the protestations once engraved in lead beneath the stones. For a brief interval, pilgrims stepping into the chapel of Henry VII could see the fossil marble slab laid flush with the floor, its clean lines contrasting with the aging floorboards. But this clarity proved ephemeral. In 1870, Dean Arthur Penrhyn Stanley, intent on enhancing the abbey's liturgical furnishings, commissioned a new altar for the chapel. Crafted of Portland stone and wrought iron, the altar rose from the floor to mid-chest height, its front panel obscuring the fossil marble slab. The slab remained in place, yet hidden beneath the altar's mensa, its plain surface serving communion wafers, so that only those who knelt or peered beneath the altar rail could glimpse the inscription. The decision reflected the abbey's shifting priorities, to honour both Edward's memory and the sacrament at which worshippers gathered daily. Decades later, in 1935, a broader renovation of the chapel of Henry VII provided an opportunity to reconcile history and devotion. The abbey's architect, Sir Herbert Baker, recognized that Pietro Torrigiano's original Italian marble bas-relief, once shattered by Puritan zealotry and later recovered, would best be displayed in context. Rather than consigning the fragment to a glass case in the chapter house, Baker integrated it into the new altar's stone facade. The bas-relief, a panel measuring 3 feet 8 inches long, 7 inches high, and 6 inches thick, now sat at eye level, framed by the altar's plain ashlar blocks. Its carved roses, lilies, and heraldic shields gleamed softly under the chapel lamps, a solitary flourish of Renaissance artistry against the limestone backdrop. The placement honoured Torrigiano's craftsmanship and reaffirmed the continuity of worship. The same altar that once sheltered Edward's coffin now bore a fragment of its original canopy. Simultaneously, Abbey conservators turned their attention to the lead coffin plate. Removed during the 1869 dig, the plate had been stabilised with shell lac to inhibit further oxidation. In 1935, after nearly 7 decades of study and storage, the plate was once again mounted for public view. Specialists affixed it to a new white marble slab, matching the fossil marble's hue, and secured it with stainless steel bolts. The plate's raised capitals, though dulled by time, remained fully legible. Beside the plate, a smaller plaque recorded the tomb's 20th century rebirth. Cast in bronze and set into the floor, it read, "This inscription records the discovery of Edward VI's original coffin plate on February the 17th, 1869, and its preservation in 1935. Thus, within a single altar, visitors encounter a palimpsest of centuries. Below the mensa, the rescue of a Puritan-stripped bas-relief speaks of religious fervour and iconoclasm in the 1640s. At eye level, Torrigiano's Renaissance fragment exemplifies the height of Tudor-era artistry. Beneath the altar floor, the fossil marble slab preserves the Victorian transcription of Edward's own lead inscription, and upon the chapel pavement, the 20th century plate and plaque narrate the abbey's caretaking across 4 distinct epochs. By choosing not to demolish the radical Victorian altar or to sequester the bas-relief in a museum, Westminster Abbey affirmed a balance between sacred use and historical display. Worshippers continue to kneel at the altar rail, offering prayers in a space enriched by layers of devotion and scholarship. Tourists and pilgrims alike pause to examine the embedded fragment and read the lead plate lettering, tracing with their eyes the curve of each rose and the serif of each capital. In this way, the chapel of Henry VII becomes more than a tomb. It is a living chronicle, a place where Tudor ambition, Puritan zeal, Victorian curiosity, and 20th century restoration converge in silent witness. Under the flicker of candlelight, the ornate bas-relief and the solemn inscriptions remind us that even as stones and metals shift hands, the memory of Edward VI endures, guarded by faith and history alike. Despite the presence of a fossil marble slab and the modern altar marking Edward VI's vault, many visitors to the chapel of Henry VII are misled by a floor plaque set a few paces away. This plaque, carved into a polished stone tile, reads in neat Roman letters, "In memory of King Edward VI, buried in this chapel." This stone was placed here by Christ's Hospital in thanksgiving for their founder on the 7th of October, 1966. Heaven knows. At first glance, one might assume that this epitaph denotes the very spot where the young king rests. In truth, the plaque serves a different purpose entirely. Technical constraints precluded cutting another stone directly above Edward's coffin, which lies beneath the altar's mensa. Attempting to install a commemorative bronze or stone tablet on the pavement immediately over the vault would have risked damaging the underlying structure and might even have breached the sacred space. Instead, the Abbey's chapter elected to situate the Christ's Hospital memorial plaque in the floor, adjacent to the sanctuary steps, where it could be both visible and protective, hiding the small, irregular hole used by the stonemasons to set the original inscription tile in 1935. As a result, numerous well-intentioned pilgrims mistakenly kneel upon the inscribed tile, believing it to be Edward's tomb. Guidebooks sometimes reiterate the error, further entrenching the misconception. Yet the true location of Edward's remains lies just behind the altar. Knowledgeable guides instruct visitors to look beyond the reredos and altar rail, where the resurrected fragment of Pietro Torrigiano's bas-relief meets the 19th century altar front. There, in that modest alcove, lies the shallow vault of lead and oak, sealed once more beneath stone, marble, and the weight of centuries. In recent decades, the Chapel of Henry VII has become one of Westminster Abbey's most frequented spaces. Tourists stream through the adjacent ambulatory, pausing to admire Holbein's mural of King Henry VIII and the tombs of his royal descendants. Yet only with precise direction can one discern the humble memorial to Edward. Turn to the left of the altar, guides often say in soft, hushed tones, and notice how the stone floor changes level. Those subtle shifts mark the outline of the vault. There is no imposing effigy, no life-sized sculpture of a princely youth. Instead, visitors find a quiet convergence of old stone, rescued sculpture, and polished marble, all bearing silent witness to a hidden tomb. Reflecting on the fate of Edward VI's burial place is to trace the ebbs and flows of English history itself. First, there was the original interment in August 1553, beneath Torrigiano's brass altar, an arrangement that honoured the Protestant reforms of the boy king's short reign. Then came the Puritan iconoclasm of December the 22nd, 1641, when zealots tore down the altar and cast its stone steps and marble frieze into the vault below. In February 1869, Victorian curiosity unearthed the lead coffin, brass fragments, and dislodged stones in an excavation motivated by the search for King James I. Later in the same century, the abbey sought to commemorate Edward anew with a fossil marble slab, only for the altar of 1870 to conceal it once more. Finally, in 1935, 20th century restoration integrated Renaissance sculpture, Victorian inscription, and modern design into a unified memorial. Throughout these transformations, no grand monument has ever been erected for Edward VI. His tomb remains a modest, understated site, deliberately unostentatious perhaps, to reflect both his youth and the contested nature of his reign. Yet the layered history of that unadorned chapel corner speaks volumes about the interplay of religion, art, and authority in England's evolution. Each reclaimed fragment and inscribed plate carries the imprint of competing agendas: papal allegiance, Protestant assertion, Puritan zeal, Victorian scholarship, and 20th century conservation. Today, as candlelight flickers across the chapel's aged stones and the hush of evening worship settles around silent visitors, Edward's legacy endures in this hidden niche. Those who pause, read the subtle markings, and trace the flow of stone will find themselves drawn into a narrative that spans the Tudor Reformation, Civil War iconoclasm, Victorian inquiry, and modern heritage care. The story of Edward VI's tomb, his resting place obscured, rediscovered, and reconsecrated, invites us to linger in contemplation of an era marked by tumultuous change, and to marvel at the fragile persistence of memory through the ages. Once the fossil marble slab and modern altar were in place, Westminster Abbey's custodians turned their attention to conserving the rescued fragments of Torrigiano's work and Edward's original coffin plate. In the autumn of 1935, specialist conservators carefully cleaned the Renaissance bas-relief panel. Using soft brushes and deionized water, they removed centuries of grime, soot, and shellac residue, all the while stabilizing fragile sections with reversible adhesives. To prevent further cracking, the panel was reinforced with an unobtrusive stainless steel armature fitted to its reverse, ensuring that the heavy marble could be displayed securely above the altar without fear of collapse. Simultaneously, the lead coffin plate lifted intact from the vault during the 1869 opening underwent a delicate restoration. Conservators first applied a mild alkaline solution to remove surface chlorides and oxidation products. Once cleaned, the plate was rinsed in distilled water and dried in a controlled humidity chamber. Finally, it was coated in multiple thin layers of shellac, a resin that seals the metal against moisture and inhibits further corrosion without obscuring the original raised lettering. After these treatments, the coffin plate was mounted onto a new slab of white marble, chosen to match the hue of the earlier fossil marble marker. The conservators drilled small pilot holes, then fixed the plate in place with stainless steel bolts, their heads countersunk flush with the marble surface. The result was a seamless presentation. Visitors could now read Edward's own words, carved in lead in 1553, set against a pristine 20th century backdrop. At the same time, the abbey installed a small bronze plaque on the south side of the altar. Measuring roughly 6 inches by 4 inches, the plaque bore this succinct inscription: "In memory of the excavation of Edward VI's tomb, February the 17th, 1869, and the preservation of his coffin plate in 1935. Edward VI, England's first Protestant king, interred here August the 8th, 1553. By commemorating both the initial archaeological event and the subsequent conservation, the abbey acknowledged the tomb's layered history. Its initial construction beneath Torrigiano's altar, its iconoclastic disruption by Puritan forces in December 1641, and its unexpected rediscovery during the Victorian quest to locate King James I. Indeed, the Victorian excavation was not driven solely by curiosity. In the early months of 1869, Abbey officials had grown concerned about the whereabouts of James I's remains, thought lost during Puritan upheavals. When workmen opened Edward's vault, located mere yards from James's expected resting place, they revealed not only corroded lead and rotted oak, but also Kentish ragstone steps and a single fragment of Torrigiano's white marble relief. These discoveries underscored that the tomb had borne multiple interventions: the original Renaissance altar, Puritan dismantling, 17th century disturbance, and 19th century excavation. In that moment, Edward's burial chamber became less a static sepulchre and more a library of political and artistic memory, each layer preserving a distinct chapter in England's religious saga. Today, the Chapel of Henry VII stands as a dynamic exhibition of Tudor heritage. At the base of the modern altar, Torrigiano's bas-relief gleams with muted warmth, its roses and lilies recalling a time of royal patronage and artistic flourish. Beneath it, the polished fossil marble and white marble slabs bear the inscriptions that trace Edward's journey: carved lead, Victorian transcription, and modern conservation. Through a glass panel in the pavement, the lead plate can be viewed without kneeling, its raised capitals bearing witness to a king's self-proclaimed supremacy over the English church. Visitors are encouraged to study each element in turn: the chipped ragstone, the metal cramps still rusted in place, the faint line where the Puritans' hands struck the altar, and the precise outlines of the shell-lac film. In doing so, they engage directly with centuries of devotion, iconoclasm, and scholarship. The absence of a grand statue or tomb effigy invites a quieter, more contemplative experience. One does not stand before Edward VI's memorial, one enters into it, peeling back time layer by layer. The lesson of Edward VI's tomb is profound. Even the smallest relic can tell a grand story of power and faith. There is no triumphant cenotaph, but the combination of rescued bas-relief, restored coffin plate, and carefully placed inscriptions weaves a richly textured tapestry of post-Reformation England. In the hush of candlelight, as pilgrims and history enthusiasts pause beside the altar rail, they are reminded that history never truly rests. Beneath the saints' inscriptions and medieval vaults, the past continues to murmur, inviting each new generation to listen, reflect, and remember. After the installation of the fossil marble slab and the new altar, Westminster Abbey turned its full attention to preserving the rescued fragments of Pietro Torrigiano's Renaissance masterpiece and Edward VI's original memorial plate. In the late autumn of 1935, expert conservators carefully cleaned the fragile marble relief. Using soft brushes and distilled water, they removed layers of soot and centuries of shell-lac residue. Where small fissures threatened to spread, they applied discreet stainless steel pins to reinforce the stone from behind, ensuring that the heavy panel could be displayed securely without altering its visible surface. Once the bas-relief was stabilized, it was lifted and mounted above the modern altar's front face, directly over the area concealing Edward's vault. The placement was almost symbolic, as though the sculpted flowers and heraldic shields now gently watched over the king's final resting place. Beneath it, the altar's unadorned Portland stone provided a quiet backdrop, allowing the intricate curves of Drake's roses, French lilies, and scrolling foliage to stand out in clear relief. Simultaneously, the original lead coffin plate underwent its own meticulous treatment. Conservators first immersed the plate in a mild alkaline solution to dissolve surface chlorides and loosen corrosion. After thorough rinsing in deionized water, the plate was dried in a humidity-controlled chamber to prevent warping. Finally, it received multiple coats of shell-lac, the robust resin that halts further oxidation while remaining fully reversible. When these steps were complete, the plate gleamed softly, its raised capitals once again legible in the dim glow of candlelight. To present Edward's own words to the public, the plate was affixed to a fresh slab of Carrara marble, its bright whiteness echoing the earlier fossil marble marker. Craftsmen drilled small pilot holes, then seated the plate using stainless steel bolts with countersunk heads. The result was a seamless union. The king's 16th century proclamation now sat at floor level, inviting hushed reverence. In concert with these efforts, the abbey added a small bronze plaque to the south flank of the altar. Measuring roughly 6 inches by 4 inches, the plaque bore this understated tribute. Excavation of the tomb of Edward VI commenced February the 17th, 1869. His coffin plate was restored and mounted here in 1935. Edward VI, interred August the 8th, 1553, first Supreme Head of the Church of England. This succinct note framed Edward's vault within its full historical context, from his burial beneath a major religious shift in 1553 to its unearthing in the Victorian era, driven by the search for King James I's remains in the neighbouring vault. Indeed, the 1869 dig served dual purposes. Although sparked by curiosity, it primarily sought to verify the location of James I's coffin. Workmen, guided by Dean Stanley, stumbled upon Edward's shallow vault, unearthing the ragstone steps of Torrigiano's dais, the marble fragment of Renaissance artistry, and the battered lead and oak that housed a teenage monarch. In that discovery, Edward's tomb became more than a sepulchre. It became a multi-layered archive, chronicling the original Tudor altar, Puritan iconoclasm of 1641, the 17th century vault opening, and the Victorian excavation. Today, the Chapel of Henry VII stands as a living exhibition of Tudor heritage and ecclesiastical evolution. On the altar front, the Italian bas-relief commands quiet admiration, its carved roses and fleur-de-lis shining like embers in a hearth of stone. Below, the Carrara marble slab and fossil marker preserve Edward's own Latin-derived inscription and its Victorian transcription. At the plaque's side, the bronze panel hints at the abbey's centuries-long stewardship. Visitors are encouraged to study each layer, to touch the faint grooves of shell, lac on the lead plate, to trace the chiseled petals of the bar, relief, and to note the slight depression in the pavement indicating the hidden vault beneath. Such examination provides a tactile link to the past, a chance to feel the weight of history, the rise and fall of religious fortunes, and the steadfast duty of those charged with safeguarding these relics. The story of Edward VI's tomb teaches us that even the smallest artifact can tell a grand tale of power and faith. There is no imposing statue gazing down upon worshippers, only fragments of marble, metal, and stone laid bare for those who pause to look. In the hush of the chapel, the boy king's memory endures, preserved by careful hands and reverent hearts. His tomb remains understated, yet in its quiet corners and whispered inscriptions, it offers a richly textured narrative of England's passage through upheaval to restoration. In the end, every fragment, whether Puritan torn, Renaissance carved, or Victorian inscribed, comes together to form a mosaic of history. The Chapel of Henry VII invites us to linger in that mosaic, to listen to the echoes of Reformation hymns and Regency prayers, and to remember that beneath the stones, history never truly sleeps. Although the Chapel of Henry VII has undergone extensive restoration, the truth remains that Edward VI lacks a grand personal monument. His elder sister, Mary I, and his younger half-sister, Elizabeth I, each received imposing tombs and effigies within Westminster Abbey. Mary's alabaster cenotaph and Elizabeth's recumbent bronze statue dominate their shared burial space with regal grandeur. In contrast, Edward's only visible memorial is a modest marble slab set before the modern altar, insufficient to stand out amidst the myriad heraldic banners and funeral insignia that adorn the chapel walls. In 1573, Cornelius Cure drafted ambitious plans for a lavish tomb for Edward, complete with sculpted canopies and heraldic carvings. Yet these never came to fruition. Elizabeth I evidently felt no pressing desire to memorialize her brother. She declined to fund a monumental sarcophagus or effigy. Moreover, the chapel's crypt-like undercroft, already dense with stone vaulting and the base of Torrigiano's brass altar, offered little room for an imposing memorial. A large tomb would have cramped the narrow nave, obstructed processional routes, and diminished the chapel's solemn atmosphere of flickering candles and reverent shadow. The spatial constraints and Elizabeth's indifference conspired to keep Edward's resting place understated. Instead, Memorialization has depended on the altar architecture itself, the mensa, Torrigiano's bas-relief fragment, and the inscribed slabs beneath parishioners' feet rather than a freestanding tomb. Today, confusion often arises from a separate commemorative plaque set into the floor near the sanctuary steps. Placed in October 1966 by Christ's Hospital, this polished stone tile bears the inscription, "In memory of King Edward VI, buried in this chapel." This stone was placed here by Christ's Hospital in thanksgiving for their founder on the 7th of October 1966. Its prominent position along the path up to the altar rail makes it easy to mistake for the boy king's actual grave marker. In reality, the abbey could not cut into the stone directly above the hidden vault, beneath which the lead coffin still lies without endangering the structure. Placing the Christ's Hospital tablet on the adjacent pavement provided clear visibility and concealed the old mortising hole left from the 1935 installation of Edward's original inscription. The misplacement highlights a long-standing principle in royal commemoration. The tomb is revealed through religious architecture rather than through overt signage. In centuries past, pilgrims would recognize the royal sepulchre by its proximity to high altars, the gleam of brass, and the hush of candlelight, more so than by a nameplate in the stone. The Christ's Hospital plaque, therefore, accidentally perpetuates a medieval mode of memorial, suggestive rather than explicit. Edward VI's burial story teaches us about the narrative power of sacred space. The altar itself, the site of Eucharistic consecration, speaks in silent imagery of Tudor upheaval. Torrigiano's delicate scrolls, the shards of Puritan iconoclasm, the communal step toward Protestant worship, the floor inscriptions fossil marble, Carrara marble, and the Christ's Hospital tablet echo successive layers of devotion and memory. Even the void beneath the altar rail, hinted at by subtle changes in floor level, forms an invisible language of presence and absence. When Torrigiano's altar was dismantled by Puritan zealots in December of 1641, a piece of the abbey's artistic heritage was lost forever. Yet, the single marble frieze fragment that survived, later displayed on the modern altar, serves as a testament to the enduring potency of Italian Renaissance art. Its restoration in 1935 reconnected the lineage of Henry VII's original chapel with Edward's contested sepulture and Mary I's subsequent reign. For custodians of historic sites, Edward's tomb offers a vital lesson. Preservation is not merely the safeguarding of physical remnants, but also the telling of the stories embedded within them. Each fragment, be it a chipped marble panel, a corroded lead plate, or a recessed floor slab, carries significance beyond its materiality. The chorus of these artifacts narrates the struggles of the Tudor Church, the fervour of Puritan iconoclasm, the curiosity of Victorian archaeologists, and the respectful restraint of 20th century conservators. Ultimately, the tomb of Edward VI has transcended its modest dimensions to become an ambassador of the post-Reformation era, emblematic of both the triumphs of religious reform and the tragic costs of political discord. Though no majestic cenotaph crowns his grave, the interplay of altar, sculpture, and inscription offers a richly textured memorial. In the candle-lit hush of the chapel of Henry VII, visitors are invited to trace the faint lines of those stones and metals, to listen for the echoes of past worship, and to reflect on a history in which faith, art, and power have intertwined beneath the abbey's vaulted ceiling. Following the interment of Edward VI and the subsequent restorations, Westminster Abbey turned its attention to the tombs of his two royal sisters, Mary I and Elizabeth I. Both queens are entombed in the same vaulted chamber of the chapel of Henry VII, yet each was commemorated with markedly grander monuments. Mary I, England's first queen regnant and a devout Catholic, died on the 17th day of November in the year 1558. Her funeral took place on the 21st of November, her body conveyed in solemn procession from St. James's Palace to Westminster Abbey. There, her alabaster cenotaph rises beneath a Gothic canopy, richly carved with heraldic shields and flanked by painted banners. The effigy of Mary, cast in plaster then gilded and painted, depicts the Queen in full regalia robes of crimson velvet edged with ermine, rosary beads at her wrist, and a high, lace-trimmed ruff about her neck. This imposing monument visually reaffirmed the brief revival of Roman Catholicism under her reign and underscored her identity as a daughter of Henry VIII, who strove to restore papal supremacy. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, whose long rule ushered in England's golden age, passed away on the 24th day of March in the year 1603. She was buried on the 28th of March, her cortege winding from Whitehall Palace to the same chapel of Henry VII. Elizabeth's tomb contrasts with her sister's. A recumbent bronze effigy lies upon a marble chest, the Queen's hands tenderly folded upon her breast. Her face, sculpted in lifelike detail, bears a serene expression, her crown and sceptre resting at her feet. Above her effigy, an ornate canopy of alabaster is supported by slender columns, while Latin inscriptions on the tomb's base extol her virtues and list her titles in resounding procession. By contrast, Edward VI's burial site contains no freestanding statue or dedicated canopy. Instead, the only physical remnant of a personal monument is the fragment of Torrigiano's bas-relief and the small memorial slabs embedded in the altar floor. This stark difference reflects more than aesthetic choice, it mirrors the political and religious volatility that surrounded Tudor succession. Mary I, seeking to bridge the divide between reformers and traditionalists, oversaw a Catholic funerary display designed to soothe her co-religionists. Elizabeth I navigated a Protestant settlement that balanced her father's legacy with her own political acumen, commissioning a tomb that underscored her station as monarch of a confident, internationally ascendant realm. Edward VI, in contrast, died as a minor whose reign had been dominated by regents and whose faith reforms sparked future conflict. His understated memorial bespeaks his youth and the ambivalence of a sister reluctant to overshadow her more celebrated legacy. Scholars examining Edward's vault have determined that it was opened at least 3 times over the centuries. The first recorded disturbance occurred in the year 1625, likely to enter King James I in the adjacent vault. The second opening took place during the Puritan ascendancy in the mid-1640s, when Cromwellite iconoclasts dismantled and flung the altar furnishings into the tomb below. The third and most dramatic excavation was in the year 1869, under Queen Victoria's reign, centred on locating James I's remains. Each intrusion left its mark. The lead coffin was bent and pitted, the oak case reduced to splintered fragments, and Renaissance marble and Puritan shorn bar, reliefs scattered among the rubble. Yet these repeated interventions, rather than obliterating Edward's memory, have ensured the survival of tangible evidence of his short life and the tumult of his age. The lead plate, the marble fragment, the ragstone steps, and the bare skull without a single hair, all these elements attest to the complex interplay of religious doctrine, political power, and artistic patronage that defined post-Reformation England. Today, Edward VI's tomb is regarded by the Abbey as an invaluable archaeological treasure. Visitors to the chapel of Henry VII receive detailed guide sheets highlighting the exact location of the modern altar. These sheets include photographs of the marble bas-relief fragment and the original coffin plate inscription, enabling guests to match these images with the artifacts set into the altar's facade and the marble floor. Through this guided approach, worshippers and tourists alike gain an appreciation that the significance of a royal tomb lies not in ostentation but in the layered narratives embedded within stone and metal. Ultimately, Edward VI's resting place teaches a profound lesson for all who steward our shared heritage. Even the humblest artifact can convey sweeping stories of faith, power, and resilience. There is no grand cenotaph for the boy king, yet the juxtaposition of a Renaissance sculpture, a Victorian inscription, and a modern conservation project weaves a richly textured memorial. Beneath the Abbey's vaulted ceiling, history lies hidden in plain sight, waiting for those who pause to uncover the whispers of a troubled reign and the enduring echoes of a kingdom forever shaped by the tides of reform. And so, as we draw the gentle curtains on our journey through the quiet stones of Westminster Abbey, let us slow our hearts and soften our thoughts. Imagine, for a moment, the pale glow of candlelight dancing across Torrigiano's carved roses, each petal a whisper of time long past, each leaf a testament to beauty born amidst turbulence. Feel the cool hush of the chapel of Henry VII envelop you, as though the very air were scented with the faint memory of sari cloth and incense, weaving a lullaby of centuries into the present hour. In this sacred corner, where a boy king slumbers beneath layers of marble, lead, and stone, we discover that history's murmurs need not clamour with grand monuments or thunderous fanfare. Instead, they speak in soft echoes, the muted clank of chisels, the solemn hush of iconoclast's hammer, the hushed awe of Victorian hands brushing away centuries of dust. It is here, in these modest fragments, a single marble frieze, a simple lead plate, the carved words of a Tudor monarch, that we find the purest reminders of our shared humanity, the fragility of life, the sweep of faith, and the enduring power of memory. What then is the message that drifts to us from Edward VI's hidden tomb? Perhaps it is that even the briefest life can leave ripples across the ages, that youthful hope and sorrow can echo through stone and time. Perhaps it is that art and devotion, once torn asunder by zealotry, can be gathered once more, piece by piece, into a mosaic of compassion and understanding. And perhaps it is that in the quietest of places, beneath candlelit vaults and beneath the feet of pilgrims, we are reminded that every life, no matter how fleeting, is worthy of remembrance and reverence. So let the final image in your mind merge with the soft glow of memory. The smooth marble beneath your hand, the barely perceptible rise and fall of the stone floor marking a king's resting place, the gentle rustle of pages in a guidebook as you read his story. Breathe in the peace of this moment, allowing the weight of history to dissolve into the stillness of your own breath. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy and the world outside these vaulted walls begins to blur, sink into the soothing embrace of sleep. May your dreams be as gentle as the flicker of candlelight upon ancient stone, and may your heart carry the quiet reassurance that, no matter how tumultuous the journey, memory and compassion endure. Sleep well, dear friend, and when you awaken, know that many more stories await tales of distant times, winding corridors of history, and the soft voices of the past calling you ever onward. If you wish to join us again on these midnight wanderings through forgotten vaults and silent chapels, simply subscribe to our channel. There, you will discover the newest and most enchanting tales we have to share. Good night, and sweet dreams.